Some thoughts ahead of the Giants' second preseason game this weekend. That's coming up next on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. Remember me, folks? I'm Patricia Traynor, your host. I know I've been absent the last couple of days, but as some of you probably know, I unfortunately tested positive for COVID on Thursday morning, so kind of been down a little bit. But I appreciate everybody who sent get well messages. I am feeling a lot better. Still not 100%. And unfortunately, I'm still COVID positive. But, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to try to tape a podcast for you because a lot of you guys are like, hey, we miss you. We miss you. Come back. And I'm going to try. I'm going to do my best. So thank you for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you in part by Elias. Their app lets you access team and player stats, head-to-head comparisons, and much more. So give yourself the competitive edge this NFL season. Find Elias Game Plan in the App Store or Google Play Store today. All right, on today's show, folks, I have a few thoughts as we go into the weekend. The Giants hosting the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday. Preseason game number 2 of 3. So just a few thoughts that I jotted down on my little notepad here. And you can agree or disagree, obviously, but feedback's always welcome. So let's get into them. All right. So over on Giants Country, we posted an article about Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator. And, it's interesting because head coach Brian Daboll has said at this point that no decision has been made regarding the play calling operation moving forward into the regular season. I would think, considering that Kafka's been doing it going back to the spring, into the summer, into the preseason, I would find it very, very hard to believe that Daboll is going to make a decision to change that. Why mess up the chemistry, the communication, which, according to everybody you ask, whether it be Daniel Jones, whether it be Kafka, whether it be Daboll, why would the Giants mess that up? So again, no decision has been made finalized. Daboll said it's up to up for debate, I guess, but I find it very hard to believe that the Giants won't have Mike Kafka calling plays on offense when the regular season starts. It just makes no sense to me for the Giants to just change after all these weeks of having Kafka do it. But we'll see. Should be worth noted that Daboll has worn the headset during practices. I don't know if that's to, lean in and make calls or if he's just listening to the calls and judging the communications. But I would be stunned if Kafka is not the play caller on offense for the Giants. All right, thought number 2. Wink Martindale has been bringing the heat all summer long. And it's interesting because one of the questions that was asked of Daboll this past week was, have you ever considered maybe asking Martindale to tone it down a little bit, so that the offense can kind of get its gear going? And you know what? If you're the Giants, you don't want that to happen because guess what? If a team, if an opponent comes in and they're blitz happy and they're getting after the offense and the quarterback and whatnot, wouldn't you want that practice now? Wouldn't it make sense to see it from your own teammates, knowing that, your quarterback's not going to get a hit? Your offensive line is seeing some looks from, one of the more sophisticated defensive coordinator minds. It just makes no sense to ask Wink Martindale to scale it back. And, we've seen instances where the offensive line has been overwhelmed. We've seen instances where Daniel Jones has been overwhelmed. But this is all good practice. And this is why you practice, to get all the stuff in. All right. What else do I think about the upcoming game? Stick around. We've got more thoughts coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, if you are living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can really be stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Now, Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500. There's no interest or credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need. Visit the App Store today and download Dave. That's Dave. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500. Terms and conditions apply and instant transfer fees may apply. Visit dave.com/legal for complete information. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and I am trying my best to give you a podcast because you know what? I know I've been sick, but I feel bad. And I miss you guys too. I miss the comments. I miss the feedback. So I'm still a little winded. Obviously, I think you can hear it, but I'm doing my best, folks. So let's get back to the New York Giants. Some thoughts that I have going into the weekend and preseason game number 2. One of the headlines this week, Saquon Barkley basically lashed out, if you will, saying that he was sick and tired of people kind of, I guess, criticizing him for being a tap dancer, for tippy-toeing to the line. And he just came out and basically said that, I'm not going to run into the back of offensive linemen's backs, kind of a slap to against the run blocking in the past. So the whole, I guess, I don't want to say, what's the word I want? The whole outburst, if you will, by Barkley, uncharacteristic to a degree. I mean, this is a guy who in the past who said, look, I don't care what other people say about my game. I only care about what my teammates and my coaches say. And for him to come out and say all that, while, you admire him for being honest, very uncharacteristic. But here's the thing, folks. Barkley, this is not a new problem with him. If you go back to 2018, even Pat Shurmur at the time said there are going to be times when Barkley has to take the dirty yards. And there have been instances when Barkley has just not taken advantage of, the creases and the holes that have been there. So yes, Barkley has a point when he said his run blocking hasn't exactly been the greatest, but you also got to take some responsibility as well. Earlier in the spring, Barkley mentioned how he was starting to feel confident in his surgically repaired knee. And maybe that confidence wasn't always there last year. So I think, it's been a compilation of things with Barkley. I think, just to come out and lash out and say, armchair clickers or whatever the term was he used, I get it. He's frustrated. He probably doesn't want to hear it all the time, but until he actually gets out there and does it and shows that he can be a decisive runner, a guy who's not going to constantly be looking for that escape hatch on the outside, which has been a long-term criticism of him, those comments are going to continue to dog him. And, at this point, while I, from the media, can appreciate the quotes and the soundbite, it's like, dude, just go out there and prove everybody wrong. Let actions speak louder than words. So far, so good with Barkley. He's been looking more decisive, more explosive. He's been, he's been doing more outside runs, but those inside runs that he's been asked to run in practice, he's looked, like I said, more decisive. He's hit the hole harder. So I'm optimistic that this is going to be the year for him. If he stays healthy, he's going to be fine. Now, of course, I'm also concerned about the offensive line, which is actually my next point. The Giants' offensive line, my gosh, what do they have to do to remove this, what seems like years-long curse on the offensive line? The offensive line has been decimated by injuries, so much so that head coach Brian Dable announced that Max Garcia, who's like their they said their fifth string center, but I don't think that's accurate. But Garcia is down at the bottom of the depth chart at center. He's going to get the start on Sunday against the Bengals. So here's the problem. Coaches will tell you that all these guys sit in the meeting rooms. They all have to work together. They all have to, communicate. There is something to be said for continuity when it comes to the offensive line. And here we are again. We're talking about this unit, the concerns we have about it, and how is this going to affect the offense? How is this going to, how is Daniel Jones going to look if, there's a miscommunication? This is still a concern. And, it's nobody's fault. Injuries do happen. I get that. But my gosh, what does this team have to do to get this offensive line fixed and healthy? I mean, Shea Lemieux dealing with the foot/toe injury, probably not going to be ready for week 1. Maybe he should be ready shortly thereafter. John Feliciano has been banged up, and that's been a problem. Your starting center who orchestrates everything, that has been a problem. Your depth has been kind of sapped out. Joshua Zudu, Jamil Douglas, just been really rough. So we'll see how the Giants deal with that. Now, they did add a couple of guys. They added Chris Owen, and they re-signed Josh Rivas to add some depth to the offensive line. Whether or not, that's going to help, I think it's more or less just to get them through the rest of the preseason. But yeah, the Giants are going to have to hit the waiver wire hard and look for guys to come in, especially if some of these injuries that they have are on the long-term side. All right, Giant fans, excuse me, we have a couple more thoughts coming up on today's podcast. Again, apologies for my voice. Stick around. I'll bring you those remaining thoughts right after this. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life can be full of twists and turns that can really test our resolve. If you need a little extra support, BetterHelp is standing by waiting to assist. BetterHelp will pair you with a licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours with whom you can message anytime you need that extra support or that extra boost in your day. This isn't a crisis line or self-help. It's professional therapy done securely and discreetly online. And right now, take 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Again, that's betterhelp.com/lockedon. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and doing my best to give you a podcast today, despite the fact that my voice is still not 100%. So thank you for tuning in. Glad to be here. Glad to be able to sit down and give you some thoughts I have ahead of Sunday's preseason game with the Cincinnati Bengals, the second of 3 preseason games for the Giants. All right. A couple more thoughts I want to talk about. Special teams coordinator Thomas McGahee continuously seems to hint that they want to get Kadarius Toney involved in the return game. Look, I get it. The guy's explosive. I get it. The guy is shifty, but I don't understand why they would want to go that route, especially considering all the injuries that Toney has dealt with since coming to the NFL. A guy who hasn't gotten any kind of, reps as a returner has been Richie James. And I don't really understand why that is. Why would you want to put Toney out there, who's one of your most valuable guys and a key cog in your offense? This goes back to, and some of you are going to say, well, look, you play your best players at the positions. Do we really know at this point that Richie James can't get the job done? Is it that big of a concern? So I, for one, hope that when Kadarius Toney is healthy, that he does not get punt return duties added to his list. I get it. He's explosive, but look, The first priority of a punt returner should be to catch and secure the ball. And ideally you want to, get advantageous field position. But I don't know, guys. I just don't like the thought of Tony being considered for punt returner, much like I didn't like the thought of Jabril Peppers when he was here being considered as punt returner. But, the coaches obviously are going to do what they feel is best. And if they feel that's best, well, we'll see how that works out for them. Okay, one more thought I have for you on today's podcast. Now, I get it. Head coach Brian Daboll is never going to come out and openly criticize a player. But I've kind of found his responses regarding Kenny Golladay to be interesting. He's talked about, how Kenny Golladay and I'm going back to the last preseason game that they played, how Golladay, the ball that he didn't come up with was thrown low, basically kind of shifting some of the blame away from the receiver. And almost like, I don't want to say putting the blame on the quarterback, but hey, who's throwing the ball to him? So, look, at some point, Golladay has a huge catch radius, and he just hasn't shown on a consistent basis the ability to stretch out and high point a ball or reach down if he needs to. And, at some point, you got to stop making excuses for the guy. Now, granted, Daboll knows Kenny Golladay a lot better than I ever will. So maybe he sees something in Golladay, in his relationship with Golladay, that necessitates the coddling. But, maybe I come from the tell it like it is school. And I don't want to say that, Daboll is putting the blame on the quarterback. But look, you saw the plays, I'm sure. By now, everybody has seen the plays in question. Galladay's got to take part of the blame. He's got to, whether the effort wasn't there or whatnot. And who knows what's going through Galladay's mind. At the start of camp, he just seems so enthusiastic, so excited about this offense and his role in it. And it just seems like the last couple weeks or so, the air has come out of that tire. So here's hoping that Golladay gets his head straightened out and he has a much, much better showing against the Bengals. That was just not a good showing by Golladay, regardless of, whether you blame Jones or whether you blame the receiver. And I do think the receiver has to take his share of the blame. All right, Giant fans, short show, I know, but as you can hear, my voice is dying on me. So thank you for tuning in to the LockedOn Giants podcast, making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Coming up, David Turner will be back with me. I'm not sure if we're going to tape Sunday night or Monday morning, but we will break down everything we see in the Giants-Bengals game. So that's coming up next week. Hope you'll join us. Until then, everybody, have a great weekend, and please stay healthy.